Good morning, everyone. Welcome to UUSF Forum on this beautiful autumn morning. And I am Jeff Peckrell. I am one of the co-chairs of the Human Rights Group, along with Dolores and Melvin, who kind of produce these forums. And this is, I think, our fifth one of the season. After today, we will have a break for a couple of weeks. We'll be back on the 29th with another one. But next week, there is something else happening in this room. Before we get started, just a few logistic things. If you haven't already had breakfast, please do that. And Q&A is generally at the end. So if you could hold your questions, we're trying to get some cards out there so you can write your questions. That's kind of an efficient way for us to hand them off to our speakers. And I'll be collecting those towards the end and bringing them up to our speaker, who I'll introduce in just a minute here. Our topic for today is Occupy SF, which, if you've been around the city for a while or living in this country, you remember Occupy movement, which was kind of a turning point, I think, in a lot of people's consciousness about the inequality of wealth in this country, which is like a growing and even, I would say, accelerating problem, which is at the root of so many of our problems that we have here, really, like homelessness and unaffordability and all these things. And so we have Tim Paulson, an esteemed local labor leader. He was the chairman of the AFL-CIO chapter here, I believe, and the Trades Council. He's retired just for a couple of years now, and now he is on the San Francisco CPUC. So there could be some other interesting topics we could explore with him in the future, but today he'll be talking about Occupy SF. I'm going to have Dolores come up and do our Ohlone recognition in a minute because we are on unceded Ohlone land. Before I do that, I just want to do a couple of other announcements. After the service today, we will be having the blessing of the animals, and Dolores will be officiating that and doing that. That's a really beautiful event to take a part of. And finally, I have to acknowledge the terrible violence which is happening in the Middle East as we speak. We're all aware of this, and we mourn the loss of life on both sides, really. We on the Human Rights Working Group would like to sort of suggest that you read the statement written by the Jewish Voice for Peace. We all aligned on what it is saying. It is kind of centering the role of our country in helping to create this problem by enabling Israel's oppression all these years. So I don't want to take time to read it. It is a bit lengthy, but it is a very, very worthwhile thing to read.
We, the members of the First Unitarian Universalist Society of San Francisco, acknowledge that our community is located on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone tribes, the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. We recognize that we benefit from living and working here, and we affirm their sovereign rights as First Peoples. The Greater Bay Area is also the ancestral territory of the Miwok, Yokuts, Patwin, and other tribes. As the original stewards of this land, the indigenous peoples understood the interconnectedness of all things and maintained harmony with nature for millennia. We honor them now for their enduring commitment to our Mother Earth. Thank you.
Thank you, Dolores. And there was one thing I forgot to mention in my introductory remarks, which is that Tim Paulson is a published author, and he's got a book about Occupy SF. And there are some copies on the table back there which are available for a very nominal fee. If you're interested in taking one home, you could do that. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Tim Paulson.
Great. Thank you, Jeff, and thank you to the Unitarians for having this forum. I don't know if, I know some of you in the room from, actions over the last generation, I want to say. But up until I retired, as Jeff referenced, about 2 years now, I'm solidly I didn't run for office again, into retirement. I actually worked literally right across the street for, close to 20 years, both when I was the director of the Labor Council, and then in my pre-retirement job, I did one term. I was recruited to be the Secretary-Treasurer of the Building and Construction Trades Council. So I come from labor. I'm a journeyman tile setter by trade. So I come from the area, and I was an officer in my own union in a previous lifetime before I ended up doing some other stuff. So I was across the street, and at times I could mention. I even know this building because there were a lot of different events that, as you all are so involved with, that do take place in this place. And I remember one time in particular when Dennis Kucinich was in town. So that's got to be like about 10 years ago or something like that. And he did a big thing. I don't remember if he was running for president then or whatever goodness and craziness he was up to at the time, but that was over across the street, and it was nuts. And my office was like the green room where he came in and got changed and whatever, and it was just all kinds of craziness going on. And then we all came over here. So I have lots of good fond memories of this institution as a socially religious and socially important place. So the background, I used to when we had extra money, we used to rent parking places underneath because there wasn't enough in the ILWU building where we were also housed. So this is kind of like a second home away from home in some regards in terms of the history of what I did in the last jobs I had. So Jeff called me up and said, "Hey, I read your article in not the Guardian, but in 48 Hills, because it's 10 years ago that Occupy, really kind of took America by storm, starting off in Zuccotti Park in New York, and then it grew, all across the country in various cities, and it was crazy. It's actually because I actually decided to take a look at the article and see what the hell I wrote 10 years ago, and I realized it's actually now been closer to 11 years since Occupy happened, just to put it in some type of context, which is either a short time ago or a long time ago, depending on what type of calendar you're on. And it was, a pretty phenomenal, event, as all of you know. And I know that, in little chats that I've had since I've been here, some of you actually did participate in the San Francisco Occupy, and we're down there at the Bocce Ball, former and then restored Bocce Ball court down, at the Ferry Building, which is sort of where the encampment ended up after, kind of moving around town a little bit, starting at the Federal Reserve Bank and then, in other various areas. So how many people actually, because I know I was asked to talk about post-Occupy, so to speak, in other words, putting it all in context, but the article I wrote was like sort of the San Francisco flavor of what Occupy San Francisco was. How many, if I may ask, and it's not a real quiz, actually read that article prior to coming in, because I wasn't going to go totally deep into all those details and revisit them. That was going to be kind of the background, and I think that's, Jeff was saying, let's bounce off of that article in that context as to what Occupy really means in the bigger scheme of campaigns and organizing and other things that have happened. So maybe I'll get into a little bit of that in context, but I'm not going to revisit that totally, other than the fact that it was absolutely crazy, and it was actually the longest because of the many things that happened during the weeks that Occupy happened. And it was weeks. It wasn't days. It wasn't 1 week. It wasn't 2 weeks. This was weeks. I mean, this thing was an organic campaign that was trying to find itself every single time, and frankly never did when it was all said and done, because it dissolved, and it was never, I think, either intended or never morphed into any type of a real institution, a real quote-unquote movement. Like when you talk about the civil rights movement, I mean, it wasn't brick and mortar, but there was a civil rights movement. And it wasn't, just a one-day protest. There was a anti-war movement, for example. And it wasn't just like one march on Market Street or one march on the Pentagon. It was a movement. Occupy was a movement, maybe with a small M on it, but it wasn't, it never really quite morphed into a total movement. You think of the 99% and the 1% that came out of it. It was, it was an anti-Wall Street, it was an anti-corporate, it was an economic justice campaign that morphed with, when you talk about who the original players are, I don't think I could actually name off of one hand who they actually were. Like, who were the first people that actually went to Zuccotti Park? Who were the first people that stormed the Federal Reserve Bank? I mean, if I looked it up, I'd probably remember, but it wasn't like you can remember. There wasn't a Tom Hayden. There wasn't a Martin Luther King per se. It was just very spontaneous and very crazy. And as everybody knows, in order to really end up getting something done, there is coalition building that happens, and there's all kinds of crazy, ways where people try to build something democratic or non-democratic or top down or bottom up or whatever else. And the history of the activist and economic justice and social justice movement in the United States is, you could talk forever about the failures and the successes and the strengths and the weaknesses of all the different campaigns that are happening, but this one in particular was very crazy. I mean, if you remember, the democracy meant you had there was mic check and there was a line and you could stand up and anybody could speak. And you could do anything that you want to. And I know Dolores was talking about, do you remember that night when in San Francisco Occupy, when we knew the police were coming, and it was finally the end game. It was getting dirty, and it was, there's public health issues, and both in New York and in San Francisco, there was like, okay, this is unsanitary, and now it's time to go bye-bye. And of course, the movement was, no, we're not gonna go because you send the cops in, and that's, the dynamic, that took place. And we did have a very dynamic one here in town because we knew the cops were coming. We had connections with City Hall and what have you. When I say we, I'm talking about the San Francisco Labor Council, because I was the director at the time and was either praised or had my ass kicked for taking the Labor Council and the different unions to be involved with Occupy. But the bottom line is we did have and used a lot of our resources to make sure that this movement, whatever it was going to do, was going to move forward, because its issues were the same issues that so many of the unions and so many of the faith groups and so many of the community groups had. It was about economic justice and screw Wall Street and let's tax somebody and take care of the income inequality in this land. That's what Occupy was about. So I'm kind of rambling here a little bit, but I'm trying to put this stuff in context as to where we are. So there's a lot of rallies, there's a lot of stuff that happens in San Francisco, in particular. San Francisco, for a variety of reasons, one starting with the history of the folks, you and I, who are, and I'm guessing that the majority of us are, either from or live in San Francisco, and we participate in the fabric of town, because here we are on Sunday, right in the middle of the city on a beautiful day, eating, bagels and drinking coffee inside of a church. So we're engaged here in the city, obviously, just by the folks that are including me that are here in the room. But there's always something going on in the street in San Francisco, whether or not it's involved with a big campaign or a small campaign. Today, I mean, the craziness that's going on in the Middle East, which I think maybe kind of caught us all because of the actual violence that's happening, caught us by surprise. But quite often one of the things that happens on the street here in San Francisco over the years, forever, has been some type of a protest, either at a government building or outside the Israeli consulate. People protesting, basically the settlements, the military position of the Israelis and the frustration and what some people are saying, sort of the apartheid stance of the Israeli government. And it's a very divisive and crazy thing. But there's always seems to be, every cycle of some time or another, change of government or some settler goes in and takes over Palestinian land. There's always something going on, either at City Hall or outside the Israeli consulate, protesting, what is happening in the Middle East. That's one thing that happens. There's probably always something going on around immigration and deportation in this city, whether or not it's at City Hall or the federal building, or if there's something high profile going on. Folks, we all gather and we go down to work on stuff, maybe even at the Immigration Center down on Sansom Street. We've had many rallies down there. There was a time, if you can believe it, just like the two-state solution or the whatever it's going on, every once in a while there's a bit of hope that floats out of Washington or Sacramento or someplace that there's going to be immigration reform. So we get mobilized and people wander around. So immigration gets us on the street. Housing gets us on the street. this town that, has not enough housing. I mean, San Francisco is sort of like a national monument. I mean, there's only so much land, and it's almost like a monument in itself. There's just not enough land in here to do stuff. So housing is crazy, and frankly, the left is getting more outflanked in terms of fighting for housing and economic justice. We just ended up, temporarily, unquote, changing the affordable housing measure, to make sure that, we can induce, developers to do more building in this city, because they say it can't pencil out if we have 50% affordable housing or 25% or 12.5% or whatever the numbers are now. And we're on the street, screw City Hall, go down there. We don't get rid of, we're not going to give away to the developers, to build market rate housing when we need more affordable housing in town. We have stuff on the street, when people get, evicted or picked up, because of drug stuff and whatever else, because we think maybe there's too much of a police presence on the street. Anyway, there's so many different things that we actually, go on the street on, and whether or not that turns into a real campaign or if it's just a protest, is sort of, as an organizer, you look at it. What has legs and what doesn't have legs? And so Occupy was, again, one of those bastions where all those issues seemed to have a place and a forum and a microphone for the period of time that it was going on. To get into the details of it, New York and San Francisco in many ways were unique in the sense that, first of all, let me go back just to talk about context. San Francisco is known as one of the media markets. There are, depending on who you talk to, there are either 5 or 7 major media markets in the United States. There's New York, there's Washington, Philadelphia, they say sometimes, Chicago sometimes, Los Angeles, San Francisco. That's kind of where, there's buzzes. Everybody has an outpost out here. Fox has their place in here. I've been on Fox News when I was the head of the Labor Council, and I didn't even know they had a place here. They actually had brick and mortar down on Battery Street, just like everybody else. So there's always something. If there's something that's going on, I'm sure that they're going to be, like right now, I'm sure that if you were sitting at home and you were watching and streaming TV, I'm going to probably just like the McCarthy thing, I'm sure it's all about the Middle East right now. Who's bombing who? What's the response? Who's talking about it? Today's Sunday, right? So all the politicians are on TV, telling what their opinion is. Well, San Francisco was always one of those towns. So no matter what happened, when I was at the Labor Council, where we have 140 different unions, and they all have different opinions, and they all have different things. They're all, working on economic issues for their members. But there's all these different things happen. There was always in San Francisco people would want to do something. If they were going to do something anyplace, they were going to do it in New York, they were going to do it in D.C., well, not D.C. quite so much, there was always something there, but in towns that are like real communities, Washington is a real community, but it's known as the capital, sort of, there's Chicago and New York and San Francisco and Los Angeles. That's where I would get a call from, say, some union or some politician or elected, and it's like, where are you going to do something? Okay, we need you on the street. We got to do a press conference, and it was always in San Francisco. So on the natural, we were always, this was a forum where, if anybody was looking, wake up one day and they're all pissed off about something, there was probably some place on the street where we could do it. I sometimes make a joke at the expense of rambling, is that I often say, when it comes to an issue, say it has to do with senior issues, which might, for stereotypical reasons, be we will fight for don't touch our Social Security. A real demand, a real piece. It's always defensive. It's never like an offensive fight, but defensive. And George Bush all of a sudden gets reelected, and he's promised, he said, we're going to reelect you, but the first thing you're going to do out the door on your second term is you're going to walk through the country and you're going to get rid of Social Security. We're going to put that crap into Wall Street and everybody. That's how retirement's going to work. If you guys are smart enough to, put your money and start buying stocks on your own and give some broker 15%, that's going to be your retirement. And that was the Republican line in terms of Social Security. Let's get rid of it. We're going to, the free market's going to take care of investing your money. It's not going to be, it's not going to be Uncle Sam, damn it, even though it's our money and it's the money we have. So we get on the street for Social Security. And that was, and that is some of the stuff that actually did happen in San Francisco. I had a train of thought on that was going somewhere else, and I'm going to abandon it right now. Geography in San Francisco, and I'm kind of circling around the edges of Occupy and in the context. I talked about the issues to get us on the street in San Francisco, and whether or not it's a campaign or not. I haven't even gotten to that part, but whether or not it's a real sustainable campaign, or if it's just the protest or the march or the rally or whatever it is. There actually is, as maybe some of you know, there are certain spots in town that are known as the rally spots. Has anybody ever heard of Local 2 Plaza? Raise your hand if you ever heard of Local 2 Plaza. You know that Local 2, the hotel workers, one of the more active and organizing locals here in San Francisco, right next to, I think it's close to 4th and Market Street. The area's been redeveloped off and on, but for the last 25 years, there's a lot. Matter of fact, it might have been built right now, or there might be a corporate plaza in there, but on 4th and Market Street, next to the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, that is this place. If somebody just said, oh, Local 2, they got a contract fight, or they're going to go picket the Marriott, or they're going to, I'm just making up these examples, where are you going? You just know those of us who get on the street, or as the head of the Labor Council, I'd send out the flyer, we'd go to the Local 2 Plaza. The janitors union, they every 3 years have a major fight, to try to get a living wage and to keep their health care or something. Where do they go? 101 California. Right there on California Street, down by Tadich, down by right in the middle of the cable cars on their way to Market Street. 101 California, that's known as where the janitors are. Anytime the janitors are doing something, people go down there. I wrote some of this stuff down. 101 California. There's always City Hall. City Hall, when in doubt, whether or not it's Di-Fi's funeral or you're protesting budget cuts, City Hall with that little iconic sign behind, that something is real going on, because if you see it in the newspaper or on TV or the photos they're taking, City Hall, that's another place where there's always going to be protest. There's the 2 federal buildings, for crying out loud, whether or not it was the old one, on Golden Gate Avenue, which still functions, or the new iconic one right off on 7th and Market Street, where Pelosi's office is, which I was told is actually kind of half abandoned right now. There's always protests there if we're talking about foreign policy or immigration reform or trying to get any other type of legislation. Folks end up going down there. But anyway, that's just sort of how San Francisco is in terms of being an activist town. There's always some place to go. Now, whether or not it's a real campaign or not, that's a totally different story. And most of my active life as a director of the Labor Council, and which is a strange job. It's I pretty much took it as my goal when I got elected to this job many years ago, was that when you had this many different constituents, which are unions, whether or not it's the firefighters, whether or not it's the janitors, whether or not it's the teachers, whether or not it's the bricklayers, whether or not it's the public sector workers, whether or not it's healthcare workers, I mean, you name it, anybody that works, there is some union in San Francisco that will represent them, whether or not they represent all of them or part of them or just pretend like they do. There's that many different unions, and the whole idea is if you want to get something done, you have to form a coalition. And my job was always to try to find out if there was an issue that we really needed to move. How are we going to do that when there might be some unions that don't, frankly, give a rat's ass whether or not this thing happens or not, unless it means bread and butter and social, real economic justice for their members. They don't care about the other stuff. Civil rights, I haven't got time for that. My members don't care about civil rights. In terms of they care about their pension and they care about their paycheck. You guys are all doing the immigration stuff. Screw that number. What are you doing? Well, that affects us too. So there's always this struggle. Who's going to be with us if we're fighting, say, for immigration reform? So that our members don't get raided and thrown off the job and are treated, like real workers, whether or not they're whether or not they're citizens or not citizens. They're still workers. They're here in the United States, and we take a position. We're going to represent, no matter what union you are, we're going to represent all our members. So the idea was always throwing together, some type of a coalition. And then, of course, since we're big bad labor, when it comes out and say we want to get something done with health care, we're going to have to do it not within just the labor movement. We're going to have to do it with the broader community. The labor movement in the United States is like, I'm probably going to fudge the numbers, maybe 10% of working people are in a union. And it's much less than that in just the private sector, the people that don't work for, a government agency or whatever else. So it's not exactly like we're the big swaggering 50s labor movement that can walk around and, we're going to be in the White House every other day and whatever else. I mean, those days are kind of crazy and kind of over. So we have to figure out other coalitions that are put together. So when we were struggling during Occupy to wonder what the hell is actually going on with this thing, where are we going to go with this, a lot of folks that were involved in this stuff were really thinking about what strategically we can take out of Occupy. What is going to be the next steps in Occupy? We're out here, we're screaming at Wall Street, and we're talking about taxing people and the unequal tax rate. I don't remember if Obama was president at the time when Occupy took place, so this wasn't in the Bush and some of those previous eras. This was right at the end of Obama's first term when we still had like a lot of hope, and there was so this wasn't like a direct reaction to Bush attacking Social Security or lowering the tax rates on the 1%. That might have been part of it. This is a fallout from the tax cuts that were given, to the 1%. The folks that didn't need all that damn money. The so-called, they were still playing the trickle down stuff. We give the rich people the money, they're going to provide for us, kind of bullshit. That so many people bought into during that period of time. That this was kind of a, whether or not it was because of who was the president or not, this was part of the message that was coming out. So people were struggling to figure out what was going on. And some of the partners that were willing to partner with us in a really institutional, which means economic way, were like the California nurses. And everybody knows the California nurses. I mean, the nurses fight. And they fight hard, and they fight strategically, and they put their money where their mouth is, and they're going to go at it, and they're going to fight for ratios, and they're going to fight to make sure the nurses are getting paid, what they're doing as frontline workers and as skilled workers, and they're out there. They were the first of all the unions, 140 unions, to actually put some skin in the game. They actually put money in and set up a nurses station, a medical station at Occupy. Came down, I remember the day, the Teamsters helped out, they had the trucks, they came down, we built a tent, they brought all the supplies, they had nurses, volunteer nurses staffing it, as protesters and whatever, and people got screwed up, that was where you went and got fixed, or you got your medicine, or you had a place to, they set up a first aid station basically in the place, and they put resources in. As a matter of fact, I don't know if you guys remember a woman named Pilar Schiavo. She was my first political director. Maria, you remember her? She's now a legislator, and she moved to LA for crying out loud. I don't remember why, but anyway, she's our legislator from there. She was the nurse that was in charge of that stuff. She was the nurse. Do you guys still have that picture up of there's a picture of Liz Schuler and all of us called We Are the anyway, fighting the 1%. We had a big march. This was when Wisconsin, this one. This was matter of fact, Joyce was asking me what that damn circle is for. That was the person who became the head of the AFL-CIO in Wisconsin, and we were marching with Wisconsin on the street. You guys remember that? Remember when Scott Walker was going crazy, getting rid of collective bargaining agreements, essentially busting the unions in, of all places, Wisconsin? This was us. We had 10,000 people on the street in San Francisco saying, "We are with Wisconsin." Stephanie Bloomingdale is now the AFL-CIO head. She happened to be there. She came to town. She was number 2, or she was the secretary treasurer, not the president at the time. Where am I going with this? We were marching on the street. My train of thought here was, I brought that up for a reason as an anecdote. Anyway, that was part of the coalition. Anyway, that was, I know what it was. Pilar ended up, the nurses sent her to Wisconsin. They gave her a free budget to buy pizza for anybody that came to the picket line. There was a famous pizza house in Madison. Do you guys remember that? All they did is made pizza for the folks that were occupying the State House in Madison. Anyway, she was there. Anyway, she ran the nursing station. The Teamsters came in. They said, "Hey, we're going to do something." Teamsters came in with their truck. They ended up getting supplies. And I remember it. It's the guy who succeeded me at the Labor Council, Rudy Gonzalez, was working with Teamsters 856, and Roel Malloy, the head of the district council, said, "Here, take the truck, and here's how much money. Get the porta potties set up. Let's bring all kinds of crates of water and stuff like that down there, and medical supplies." They supplied the nurses' tent. So there was people that had skin in the name. IATSE, the stagehands and stuff. I had instead of just the bullhorns, which actually it was sort of like Newport Jazz Festival when we brought in the electric microphones and stuff. Some of the Occupy people said, "Screw that noise. We want the bullhorns, none of this electric fancy ass corporate crap." But we had a microphone so people could hear each other a little bit more and whatever. Anyway, there was resources that were put in where people were a movement that was waiting, to morph into something. Anyway, the short-term period is Occupy ended up, dismantling because there was, institutionally there was not going to be a structure. It was all going to be consensus, and there was not going to be any permanent leaders, which was, there's no complaints about that. It just didn't turn into an official movement. But it did morph into, as you know, Black Lives Matter, and the Bernie movement came out of it. The issues that came out of Occupy, that became the Bernie Sanders campaign, or was the Bernie Sanders campaign. I mean, his issues and his visions about economic justice and equality and housing and defunding military and getting our priorities straight. That is some of the stuff that frankly did come out of Occupy. I'm reminded of a piece because I'm talking about the labor movement because I do have a perspective as a trade unionist, and that's I can't believe it. When I actually retired a couple of years ago, the longest job I ever had in my life was as director of the Labor Council. I was there. A colleague of mine, Maria, who surprisingly wandered down here to come to town and listen to me yabber, just when I asked her, I said, "Do you know how long I was there last night?" And she said, "What, 5 years?" And it was like, I was there 15 years. That's the longest I ever had a job in my life. I probably would have quit earlier if I'd known how many years it was, but I left, when I was in my 60s, so I'm not going to be Chuck Grassley. I'd be a full-time senator when I'm probably not very good at what I'm doing anymore. But anyway, it was Rudy ended up taking my job as the Teamster at the time. So there's a succession, and there's obviously a continuation of everybody trying to build coalitions and continue. So unions and how they play their way in terms of social justice. Towards the end of his life, I actually became friends close friends with one of the folks that a lot of us know, and this was during the time when he was writing books, in particular criticizing our policy in Iraq and Afghanistan and stuff like that. Tom Hayden, I think most of you have heard and know about the history of Tom Hayden, and he had a wild life too. Speaking of people who were long, I didn't realize he spent that much time as an official legislator in Sacramento. He was both in the House or in the he was both a representative and a state senator for years and years and years. Anyway, I was out, I ran into him for the very first time at an anti-war rally when I was at something else in a different building, sort of like this place. I was in a union hall in the East Bay, and I was at a meeting. It was a healthcare meeting. I remember it. It was a healthcare meeting, and maybe some of you were at it. We've been fighting for universal healthcare forever. And in the next room, there were people screaming and yelling, and I looked in there, and it was Tom Hayden doing a book reading in there. So anyway, he and I became friends and we had dinner. And one time he told me, he said, how come it took people that had progressive bents in the labor movement, how come there weren't more of you guys that sort of didn't take over the labor movement and what have you? And it's probably, in many ways, it was the question of the day. Because, he was interested, you got elected to be the head of the labor movement in San Francisco, whatever that means. It means I had 150 bosses. It wasn't me. It was like whatever the unions wanted to work on. And I said, because, a lot of folks don't keep their jobs if they all of a sudden start to do immigration, or if they start to work with social justice instead of bread and butter issues in their union. You don't get a good contract. The members are going to vote you out. They care mostly. It's like if you go in there and all of a sudden your health care disappears and you're out there on the street protesting with those damn Unitarians about, anti-war or civil rights or something like that, they're going to vote your ass out of office. So I mean, that's kind of, some of the stuff that happens there. So there's always a juggle between doing social issues. I was looking the other day. I don't know if I mentioned it or if it's just or Jeff had said it when he was introducing me, but one of the day jobs I had with our beloved Democratic Party was I was the labor chair of the state Democratic Party, and it was no, yeah, okay, now you're going to be a Democrat, you're not going to be a trade unionist. I mean, you can't win. You're just like, I'm always selling out. But it was important stuff to do, and when it was time for me to retire, I wanted to have somebody else. Obviously I was going to retire from that position too, even though I'm active in the Democratic Party still, I'm less and less as now that I'm retired. But the new person who's the chair of the party is from ADW, the AFSCME local, the home care workers, a woman named Astrid Zuniga. She cares for her son. These are the long care worker unions. It's actually, I think, the biggest union in the state. I think they have 175,000 members now. Doug Moore is the president, if you're looking at names, but they represent home care workers on the AFSCME side of things throughout the state. The folks that take care of our parents and take care of us, and the folks that didn't have collective bargaining agreements that need the counties and the cities, to pay them, and they're making barely over minimum wage. Here in San Francisco, the home care workers, under the great leadership of SEIU 250 at the time, then UHW, they fought to get a legislation passed so that there would be an actual entity that could be called the boss or the employer that could distribute funds to home care workers so they could get dental care. Was the first thing. When Willie Brown was the mayor, he was just coming out of the legislature, he helped to get health care. I read their website last night, literally, just to see, because I found that Astrid Zuniga just got appointed by Newsom to be on some long-term care board, some new board that she fought hard to create, just to deal with home care patients. And I read the statement, UDW AFSCME, we are a social justice union. It didn't start off by saying, we're going to fight for your wages, we're going to represent you. It said, we are a social justice movement, union. And it's like, wow, I don't think I have, of all my years, ever seen that. And I know them on the street because they're incredibly active. They put their resources, they go to Sacramento, they march, they fight, they're on the street, and they're fighting for, living wages for the people, who take care of our elderly population. That's what they do for a living. When you can't get out of bed or you don't want to go to the grocery store, these are the folks that take care of us. And it's obviously, as everybody knows, that's a little bit more of what the job growth is, health care and home care. I mean, that seems to be where the job growth is, except for the gambling, the tech, and the crypto and stuff, which, drives the economy, but, and drives real things. It's those types of jobs, the necessary workers, the social justice union. And so I told Hayden that. I said, yeah, I mean, most of us, we get voted out of office. We go too far down those lines, and we don't get contracts. That's what's so funny now, and now I'm definitely going off on a tangent, although Jeff told me I had a whole damn hour, which is probably even though I kind of did this for a living, the longest I would ever talk in my life. So I'm going to cut off, after I'm going to go through my bullet points, I'm going to cut off because this is a forum, and I know that you guys are going to have, or hopefully you guys are going to have a lot of questions. I actually looked up one of your archives when Tim Redmond was here a little while ago. So you guys had a lot of questions. So I'm going to shut myself off. So where I'm going with this is that I wanted to get through, whatever bullet points I had, to sort of cover the stuff that I was tasked, to put together in terms of Occupy, before I got to the question part. So I missed my train of thought when I was talking about that stuff and asked for the time. Anyway, that being said, some of the things I definitely wanted to talk about in context. We were in the middle of Obama's term when Occupy happened, and the reason I remember that when I was thinking that is, as I was telling you, as the labor chair of the Democratic Party, I actually went to Charlotte, North Carolina as a delegate for the Democratic convention that year. It was in Charlotte. People were screaming and yelling because there weren't enough union hotels, but it was like the idea was let's go into the South and which has definitely not been friendly to presidential politics, and it was going to go down to Charlotte. So I was actually down in Charlotte, and this is when Obama was going to get nominated the second time around. And I do have an anecdote about that because I sort of alluded to the fact we had a lot of hope when Obama first came in, and I referenced the tax cuts, that Bush had done that pissed us all off. When we were there, I, at least in the labor movement, I was one of the folks that was, at that time, incredibly pissed off with Obama because when he got squeezed, the same way that McCarthy and the Dems were getting squeezed in in D.C. just a few weeks ago, we want to cut, or we're going to shut down government, and it probably was going to happen. And McCarthy, that very strong man that we know so well, ended up caving, for the sake of, keeping government alive, ended up getting booted for it. We were feeling the same way about Obama. Every time that squeeze would happen, we didn't have to wait for, what's the guy's name, Gatz or something, the guy, the knucklehead from Florida, that, man, got to read his playbook. That power that he's, short-term power, but that power that he gained with having a minority status is pretty impressive, even though I hate it. But, Obama caved. Every time there was time to do a budget deal, he would do something that would be just so destructive. He would agree to freeze, say, for example, Social Security contributions on payroll taxes. He'd cave on some of this stuff that sounds easy. You'll never get it back. All of a sudden, you give a payroll tax break, or you get some kind of tax break. You try to get that crap back. He did that, and during that period of time, I sat on some national committees with Lorena Gonzalez and Art Pulaski at the time. There was some of us on labor councils and state feds that would go back east, and he invited us over right about that time to do a photo op at the White House. And we wrote back because they heard some of us were in town. And we said, no, we're not going. Anyway, I was in Charlotte when Occupy was taking place. I went there for a few days, as the delegate to the Democratic National Convention. And they had an Occupy in Charlotte. So, they had, I don't know if you remember this or even cared, because I actually don't care now, but I have to remember it because I had to put some context into Occupy today, is they had fences all around the convention center. It was like the West Bank or West Berlin or something, and this was where the Democratic Party was meeting, and you had to show your credentials and get through the gate and whatever. And I think we had to take maybe a shuttle or a bus from the hotel. California had a hotel. I remember that because Ed Lee was right next door to me, and Kamala Harris was on the other side. And this is 2009, and we drove by, and I saw Occupy. I saw these tents, and it was crazy. People looked like me, kind of white and hair a little too long, and they were all sitting there. All the tents were perfect. It looked like they'd come. This is like REI had set up the Occupy movement. It was the cleanest thing. It was on some boulevard with a really nice little park, and there were, like 20 tents. And I saw, I drove by, saw somebody was in line talking. I saw a little flipping of the hands, and so that was Occupy. Everybody had Occupy. So that's in context. Obama was the president and about ready to get unanimously reelected as the as our second president. And so Jeff said there's a question coming in that referencing Obama, which I did, and said, and there was an implication that Obama was responsible for helping to get rid of the Occupy movement. I don't think he was engaged, that much to be a decision maker. I might be wrong. Definitely in San Francisco, it didn't come up. I know in particular because I did talk to my counterpart in New York, Vinny Alvarez at the time, who is still the head of the Central Labor Council in New York, and he was in constant talk with Bloomberg at the time because Bloomberg was going to do the same thing that Ed Lee did. There did seem to be some type of, I don't know if it emanated from the White House, I never heard that, but there did seem to be a certain time where whether or not it was the excuse of like the Department of Public Works in cities. There was a time, Occupy was getting pretty filthy. You can't just live on the street in a community without infrastructure, and it's definitely a target for people that are homeless. There's food, there's activity, there's people are sleeping. It's like, people were coming over that had nothing to do with advocating for the movement. Probably a lot of the folks that would benefit from, some of the things that were being advocated for, but were there. But Bloomberg was going to shut it down. And I'm talking to Vinny, and he said, I said, that's going to be absolutely, disastrous for politicians if you do that, because, they're going to get their ass kicked. Occupy is on the airwaves every single day. And, Bloomberg's going to shut it down, and Ed Lee's going to shut it down. And they got to the point where it was quote unquote a sanitary thing. So it was going to happen. The end was in the sight. I think a lot of us that were paying attention, such as me, knew this was, the end was coming in. There was not a brick and mortar thing that came out of it. And matter of fact, those of you who read the article might know what happened. So Obama, I don't think had anything to do with it, but local pressure on folks, both pro-Occupy and anti-Occupy, where that dynamic on a local level is what ultimately closed them or didn't close them down in various cities. San Francisco, we kept it open for an extra couple of weeks because we said no damn way, until they finally said, the sanitary things are bad. I had healthcare people out there saying, Tim, it's going to happen. We still did a protest, and I think Dolores had referenced it earlier. We were there the night. I had reconnaissance, and there were the troops, I knew they were on Treasure Island. They had all the paddy wagons, they had all the stuff, they had their shields, they had their stuff, and it was like they were coming in like it was, like we're going to wipe this place out, which was pretty crazy. And I organized all the, I think there were like 7 of the Board of Supervisors came down. They wanted to be, I said, get your ass down there, come on. Some of them were running for re-election, so just for kicks they'd come down, so maybe they get elected and get arrested, and then they'd look better or something like that. That's my cynical side, but the bottom line is, we did some power. The heads of major unions were there with us, and we sat down. As a matter of fact, talking about consensus, I remember there was, it's been so long, what do you call it when everybody assembled? Mic check, everybody, how did you call a meeting? I don't remember what it was. There was a code for, hey, we're going to have a forum, we're going to have a town hall, we're going to, whatever it was called. And they did that night 6 times just to determine where we were going to sit when the police came. We all would march, and we'd go north, and then we'd march, and we'd go to the Embarcadero, then we'd march, and then we'd go to the Beale Street or Spear Street side and whatever. We did it like 8 times, and I'm thinking, it doesn't matter. They're going to come in, and we're not going to resist anyway. So it doesn't matter where we look. If we want to look the way the camera looks good for those that care, we could do that. Anyway, we did all that stuff, and they backed off because we had so much stuff. We'd mobilized all the media. We said we were in the media market. There was ABC, NBC, Fox. Everybody was down to watch Occupy get busted. We had the media market stuff going on, and of course, next thing they know, they backed off. The cops never came. We saw it. We had enough reconnaissance going on. That's what I do for a living, and we knew that the order was given, don't go. And we didn't capitulate. We declared victory, and then folks that knew that there was no more there. You were going down, and we weren't changing policy. It sort of disappeared on its own. So there were some cities, I think, where they went in and wiped them out, and that was the end of the story without much resistance. I think that might have happened in Washington. I was in D.C. once to see at McPherson Square, I think it was. They had the Occupy going on there. It was a strong one, and I think that sort of disappeared on its own. So there was not a real concerted, we're going in to get them. People wanted to do it, but there was enough there in Occupy that it was bad. Do you guys remember Occupy Oakland? Occupy Oakland, you'd think you were in a different country. The cops did come out there. They shot somebody. Somebody lost their eye. You'd think it was a war zone. It looked like it was Gaza a couple times. Of course, the news, they love to do it, just like in San Francisco. They love to take those same pictures of homeless and tenderloin stuff, and they make it look like the whole town is screwed up. Well, there's some stuff that's screwed up, don't get me wrong, but you travel and people, oh, San Francisco, my God. It's not as bad as the pictures show, but in Oakland, that's what they did with Occupy. You'd think it was World War III. Do you remember that? I mean, it was, who was the mayor then? Was that, what's her name? I forget. Anyway, they sent the cops in on Oakland. They swept and marched, and you'd think there was, this was like, New York during the anti-war days, when they, wiped the hippies off the street. But that was crazy. But anyway, it morphed out on its own. I think I'm going to, I got some other stuff I was going to go, but I'm on the verge of rambling, so I'm going to go for questions now. Lots of questions. Okay, that's a forum. Okay, go for it.
So one of them, I think you already did address it a little bit. Someone was interested in the consensus decision-making process used in the Occupy camps.
Yeah, it was. This was consensus, an activist consensus model. Consensus is what everybody loves. Why can't we all just get along and let's just come up with what we have? Well, in reality, that doesn't work. But there were rules that were established, and they were usually consensus rules that were established that just said nothing is going to happen until everybody agrees. And if you object, then it wouldn't happen. I know that somebody objected one time. For example, I was just giving you the example of when there was, I wish I had the terms down. There used to be a glossary of all the stuff we learned from Occupy, and it was wonderful, all the new languages, no shouting, just go like this, and if you don't like it, you go like this. No, you don't have a boo, no yays, no boos, just, come on, just shut up and go like this, and we get what you're saying. There was some cool stuff that came out of there, and consensus was that same way. But if there wasn't consensus, whatever was on the table did not have to happen. And there were no real institutional decisions that had to be done, so consensus really never came to an end because nobody ever did put together a brick and mortar or a real constitution to move, the Occupy movement into any type of a mainstream. It was absolutely not done. So the consensus actually, I think, worked in the short-term concept that it is, but I personally think that consensus doesn't work. And if I can give an example of that, is that how many people were involved in the living wage movement in San Francisco 20 years ago? I was working for the janitors movement at the time then, and there were 75 people on the steering committee of the living wage movement, and it became known as the minimum compensation ordinance eventually, and Tom Amiano was the lead author of that, and it was consensus, and nobody could ever come to a conclusion. It never came in. It took, I hate to say it, but it took Willie Brown coming in and squeezing a few arms and saying, do you want a minimum wage a minimum compensation, a living wage, or don't you? Living wage was not a minimum wage. It was for folks that have city contracts. Anybody that works under a contract or is part of the vendor or whatever it is has got to get at least the minimum wage is essentially what that concept was. It was a certain category of people. It took forever. They never got it. There was never, nobody, no, you got to include these people, you got to include these people. And it was all good stuff, but nobody could ever cut to the chase. And that was horrible. I was part of it. I went to meeting after meeting after meeting, and we'd come to a final piece of legislation to work it out, and then somebody vetoed it, and it was consensus, so nothing ever happened. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, you already addressed how the Occupy camps sort of broke up and ended, but someone has asked about repression. How could you talk about the repression that led to the breakup of Occupy? How coordinated was the attack on Occupy nationally? How much did repressive agencies like the FBI contribute to this? Was there anything like a COINTELPRO operation involved?
I didn't see it. I mean, the conspiracy is that, I mean, everybody knows that when any time something like this happens, the FBI, looks to see what's going on. I mean, that's just been their charge, and there's probably other folks that do it, but I never saw any of it. I never felt it. I wouldn't be surprised if there was people in there taping and what have you, but never felt that absolute, presence of that stuff happening. And be curious if somebody that asked that question might have said, well, I heard that X, Y, Z. I'd be curious.
Okay,
but that being said.
Next question. Occupy was set in motion by economic injustice. Today's economic injustice is as great as ever. Do you see any way to seriously address this short of a radical reorganization of society?
Well, I mean, that's the million-dollar question in terms of economic justice, right? I mean, it's, obviously, the main message that comes out of Occupy, if you're going to be looking 100 years from now, what was Occupy about? It was a bunch of activists on the street for a long period of time that were protesting, and it was attached to Wall Street, and they were pointing out the economic injustice between the fact that 1% controlled 30% of the wealth in this country, and that was the narrative that came out of it. And it's still the narrative in many ways even worse than it is today. I mean, the government, if you talk about changing the government, if the government is probably closer to being a fascist government than it's ever been in the history of the United States, considering the way that the Republican Party has been, usurped by, the Trumps and the Freedom Caucus and the Tea Party and all the folks that, whether or not it's ideologically cute and pure or whether or not they're just absolutely economic terrorists and greedy bastards are, that much closer to winning more government offices than they probably ever have. And that's what's so scary is that, if you look at the polls right now, even this many years later, if the election was held today, which it isn't and it won't, it's a long ways off, but the polling says that half our country would vote for Trump. That's how far away much farther we are away 10 years from, getting hopes of economic justice than we ever did. I mean, we're going to continue, cycles are cycles, but we're in worse shape, economically. Well, actually, in terms of institutionally and economically, we're in worse shape now than we were 10 years ago. Then we had hopes for budget changes, and we had hopes for the Employee Free Choice Act. Remember that one? This is like, instead of going through the NLRB elections, which are basically useless and they don't work. I mean, labor law is ridiculous. The new way of doing it is like if we're all in a room here and we want to unionize this damn church, if there's 50% of us here and we all sign a petition, just like that gerrymandering petition that somebody had, which I didn't read, but we all signed that and we went to anyway, if we went to the bosses of the Unitarians and we said we want to be in a union, they'd have to do it. That's the law we want, majority rules. Instead, we get screwed over. What was the question? Yeah, anyway.
I think you've addressed that question really well. Thank you. One of the first questions we got was from Art Persico. I hope I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He's on
Teamsters 853. Is he here?
He's on Zoom.
Oh.
Yes, he said he's a former Labor Council delegate and one of the 99% coalition organizers. So he says, you said Occupy never became a real movement. Do you think we need a similar one now to counter the Trump right wing of the Republican Party? Isn't the lack of a progressive movement now giving the right wing the advantage? And what could the labor movement do now to help create the movement we need?
Well, I'll go down. We do have a constitution at the Labor Council, of which I'm no longer the executive director, but I do have the authority to along with the president, who is, I think, now still Mike Casey from Local 2, to appoint a chair for any damn type of committee we want to do. So since I can talk as a retiree, Art Persico is now the chair of the 99% coalition of the Labor Council, and it's up to you to get a meeting. What's today, Sunday? Art, if you can do it by Sunday night. I think since I'm not there, I can mess with the delegate meetings of the Labor Council, and you get that together, do a sign-up sheet, and find out how many people want to put together a 99% committee to deal with economic freedom. And I'm being facetious, but it comes organically, usually from somebody that's aggrieved in a particular union, and a coalition gets built around whatever issues those are, whether it's taxation or increasing budgets or any other type of institutional things that have to be done, which have to be done with legislation or a referendum. And that takes time and resources, which, by the way, I didn't get into too much, but real coalition and real campaigning. What happened, Rosa Parks gets on the bus, and that's part of the human rights, civil rights thing. That didn't happen because Rosa Parks one day decided, screw it, I'm getting sick of this stuff. I mean, ever heard of the Highlander Center? I mean, there was a whole part of a campaign. She got on the bus based on what that was going to be, and there was lots of preparation that was done. So all this stuff has to be done organically and through coalitions and what have you. And but Art's question, because Art has always been active in the council, is that we are going to, we need to be on the streets and we need to do it. And folks like Art are pushers. And so there. Good question, Art.
Here's a question from someone who might not have been here at the beginning. What was the objective of Occupy Wall Street, and what did OWS accomplish?
Ultimately, in hindsight, there wasn't an objection. There wasn't an objective. It's like usually in a major campaign, you develop, or either you come in with very specific demands. Like, for example, don't touch Social Security. That's a demand. That's there. Do not do anything legislatively, budget-wise, executive orders, anything to mess with Social Security. That's a demand. It's absolutely true. It's not an offensive campaign. This isn't like, promoting and like when we did get Social Security, or when we did get Medicare, or when, the National Labor Relations Act was finally passed so that unions were legal. This is a defensive campaign, but it's a real one. And Occupy had a whole list of things that they wanted to have happen. They wanted to eat the rich, and we wanted to tax the rich, and we wanted to, continue with whatever else it was. So there was ultimately, I'll say, there was not a ultimate demand. That got taken up by the Black Lives Matter and Bernie-crats and other folks that actually turned into real sustainable and identifiable movements.
This question, what observation do you have on the Black Rock phenomenon? I believe they're referring to the investment firm. I'm not sure exactly. The Black Rock phenomenon.
I'm not sure what that is, but I think what they mean is that, right. Right. No, I know what they are. I don't know what the phenomena meant by that. But there's everything in this country now is based on real estate, and it's corporate real estate. The hotels. The Fairmont isn't owned by, the benevolent Ben Swig. The Holiday Inn is not like this little Midwestern, family, hotel chain or whatever else. These are all owned by real estate folks. For those of you who travel for work or whatever, if you go to the Plaza Hotel in New York, I'm going to make it up, I couldn't tell you if you put a gun to my head who owns that thing now. It could be a Marriott, it could be a Hilton, it could be a BlackRock, it could be Warren Buffett owns the damn thing. It's all about buying real estate and hospitality. We'll do what we can as long as it doesn't cost too much. So I mean, all these industries are doing that, and that's, frankly, they're the 1%. And realtors are the worst of them. San Francisco, it's realtors are driving more of the inequality in this city than anything. People enjoy their property. I mean, I was stupid enough to buy a house 100 years ago, and I'm proud of it. Nobody's going to touch it because it's mine. That's how people get with property, and the realtors exploit that. And they want to buy and own everything and charge us, $6,000 for a studio apartment.
So I think we'll do about 5 more minutes of questions, and then Dolores is going to read some of the original manifesto and possibly a poem that was written. Okay. All right, so we're going to
Okay.
reserve a couple of minutes at the end for that. So a few
Okay.
more minutes of questions. We have two that relate to the current strikes that are happening and unions and how they relate to social justice. So link social justice to the strikes of the auto workers, UPS, and the Kaiser Health staff. And another question asks, has anyone tackled how to persuade union members who don't see connections between social and economic issues and bread and butter issues?
Great. Yeah, I addressed that second part a little bit. Listen, it's probably, I can make a joke right now that, that probably if I had to judge my life as a career as a labor organizer, that I've been an abject failure my entire life. Because, I mean, if you actually are data driven and stuff, the labor movement, every single year that I've been in, except for maybe 2 or 3, the numbers have gone down. There are less people in the labor movement now than there were when I started, by significant numbers. The corporate attack has been relentless, for almost 2 generations right now. American business has made a line in the sand years ago that they're going to do everything they can to be union free. They do not want to have workers to have a voice at work and to mess with their business plans, to sit down and negotiate. People say that the only businesses that have labor problems are those that are signatory to unions. And there's some truth in that, kind of a perverted one. But it's what's happening right now is nuts. And a lot of it is all these strikes, and that's the United Auto Workers or the Starbucks or the retail folks or what have you, and the UPS folks. They're all done with a change of leadership. This goes back to the Tom Hayden question. Where did it take these folks? So this guy Fain, who took over like literally 3 days ago, the United Auto Workers, and took them on strike. And he took them on strike in a way that hasn't been done in a while. I don't know if that was his idea per se, but it's under his administration. They're doing these rolling strikes. So, let's go down to Ohio and screw up that town and really stick them, at the Ford plant or and he's going all over the place and they're going crazy. And I just read the other day, I've been out of town until a few days ago. I was back dealing with family stuff in Minnesota, which I escaped from when I was 17 years old, the home of the Democratic Farmer Labor Committee. Anyway, all these strikes are going on, and it's exciting. And this guy, he bucked the leadership. He's a new leader. He's in there. Now, whether or not they win or not, I don't know. But I just found out that all these battery plants are now going to be under the United Auto Workers contract. That is a huge win for electrical workers. When Ford switches from getting rid of those, fancy F-250s, and now they're going to put, batteries in the F-250s and probably spend extra money on the commercials to prove that, men drive electric vehicles too, or whatever the heck they do. I'm just joking. Those are going to be union jobs. They're not going to go to, some unknown town, a poor town in Alabama, and give people $2 more than minimum wage to do what people in Detroit are, making, middle class salaries on. So it's exciting, and everybody knows. I hate polling, except you need it to find out what's going on. Is that the last couple of years, people for the first time ever say that they have a better favor of being or what unions are than ever. It's like 60%. People say we love unions, we need unions. Somehow or another, this inequality is trained into, it's not like the big old stupid union bosses. It's actually, no, being in a union means you have a voice at work. No matter who the leaders are, you have a union, you have a voice at work. The only sustainable organization in America that fights for workers. It's self-sustaining, members pay dues, it has money. No other worker groups have money. A lot of that money comes from grants, and you know what a lot of grants are, corporations trying to get the blood off their hands by giving away money, for charity. Those are some of the grants and we take that money, damn it, but it's the unions, it's pure money. It comes from members. And so having that, you've got to provide, like the United Auto Workers are. They want good contracts, good money. He's asking for 40%. And damn it, that's what members like to hear. They like to hear that stuff. Just as much as they like to hear about equal rights, they like to hear about somebody fighting for more money in their pocket because they've got to eat and feed. So it's exciting time. They call it the union summer. The writers and the actors. I'm not close to it, but The writers settled, before the actors did, and the actors, I think, have more power, but the writers always get screwed. They settled and got good stuff in terms of streaming. This is an exciting time,
Hollywood.
The Screenwriters Guild just settled, I think it was last week. And a lot of the artificial intelligence and streaming and residuals, they got that stuff, so I've been told. I haven't read all the details, but I don't know. The headlines don't usually lie especially for unions. If they say we won, it's a begrudging headline.
Okay, so we'll wrap up with a couple of questions. One relates this to the biggest of all questions, climate change, and the other is kind of hyper-local, so you'll have to try to address all of this in a couple of minutes. The first question is the issue of climate change and environmental degradation. Has this become a part of labor unions or Occupy's work? And the second question says, what is the proposed solution to what is going on in the Tenderloin, the largest unhoused population we have, and the largest need for mental health assistance? By the way, I want to make a plug for a forum we're having in November. We're having Dr. Robert Oken, who used to be the chief of psychiatry at San Francisco General and UCSF. He's going to be here speaking about that very topic of mental health issues among our unhoused population. So please come back for that if that was your question. So yeah, those are the last two questions, and we just have a couple of minutes before Dolores will read a little bit from the manifesto.
Go back. What was the beginning of the first one?
Yes,
again?
So how does the issue of climate change and
Yes,
environmental...
climate change. Got it. Thanks. That's been, frankly, one of the toughest one that I think the unions have had to deal with, because there are so many of the, it's the old industries. They're all based on, the wild commie CIO folks that went into factories and flipped them around and whatever else. I mean, that's all fossil fuel driven economies that a lot of it has gone away. The factories, the auto workers, for example. That's why this victory around electrical cars for good wages is good, because the corporations fight us against each other. They're taking away your jobs for that hippy-dippy green energy stuff, and it's always been a huge issue. And to be in charge of a labor union that represents workers that work in fossil fuel and old industries to switch over, to the wind turbines and as opposed to coal, as opposed to other stuff, it's really tough. There's a miners union, there's a coal miners union, and there's a progressive that runs it, but if he still does, but but he can only go so far, because it's not like, just folks want to just shut down the coal mines. And frankly, Al Gore came to the surface the other day, and he just said there are things. You can flip the switch right now. You stop fossil fuel, we can clean things up. Other things won't happen, but fossil fuel is the big thing, and we have unions that are driven by that. Trump's out there exploiting it. Yeah, they're getting rid of your jobs. So it's one of the toughest one. There are all kinds of coalitions, and they have all kinds of wonderful ideas, but in terms of transitioning to jobs, to shut down a factory and to turn it into a different type of a factory, when in reality, most companies see that as an opportunity to get union workers into a non-union plant somewhere else. That dynamic is going on. That's a tough one, because if people are losing their jobs, they're going to probably say, I want my job, more than they care about the environment, because they'll be dead by then anyway, unquote. So, and the last one, the Tenderloin, have fun. That's historically always been, the place where people can find housing, and it's been tough, and it's now it's the central stuff. That's a forum in itself, for crying out loud, right, Dolores?
Right.
Okay,
Right.
so thank you.
Can you hear me? Oh, I just want to make a couple.
Yes.
And my friend Karen Melander Magoon, she is a poet, and she's going to read something, wrap it up with a nice poem about Occupy. But I just wanted to mention that I have at home, I forgot to bring them in, or I just forgot about it. They did have a beautiful manifesto and a declaration of what they were about. And I'm just going to read you a few of the words that tell what they tried to do. And they laid the basis for the people in this country to wake up a little bit about what our economic system is here and how unjust and inequitable it really was. So they said, as we gather together in solidarity to express a feeling of mass injustice, we must not lose sight of what brought us together. We write so that all people who feel wronged by the corporate forces of the world can know that we are your allies. As one people united, we acknowledge the reality that the future of the human race requires the cooperation of its members, that our system must protect our rights. And upon corruption of that system, it is up to the individuals to protect our own rights and those of their neighbors, that a democratic government derives its just power from the people, but corporations do not seek to consent to extract wealth from the people and the earth, and that no democracy is attainable when the process is determined by economic power. We come to you at a time when corporations, which place profit over people, self-interest over justice, and oppression over equality, run our governments. We have peacefully assembled here, not only in New York, but in other places, like you mentioned, Paul. But okay, we have peacefully assembled here, as is our right, to let these facts be known. They have taken our houses through illegal foreclosure procedures, and it goes on and on. They have taken bailouts from taxpayers with impunity. They have poisoned the food supply through negligence and undermined the farming system through monopolization. They have profited off of the torture, confinement, and cruel treatment of countless non-human animals and actively hide these practices. That's going on right now up in Sonoma County. They have continuously sought to strip employees of the rights to negotiate for better pay and safer working conditions. They have held students hostage with tens of thousands of dollars of debt on education. And it sort of goes on, and then it stops here. Oh, they have used the military and police to force and prevent freedom of the press. They have deliberately declined to recall faulty products, endangering the lives in pursuit of profit. And then it goes on some more, and then at the end it says, to the people of the world, we, the New York City General Assembly, occupying Wall Street and Liberty Square, urge you to assert your power. Exercise your right to peaceably assemble, occupy public space, create a process to address the problems we face, and generate solutions accessible to everyone. To all communities that take action and form groups in the spirit of democracy, we offer support, documentation, and all the resources at our disposal. So I think some of the things they wrote in those days were some were so poignant.
So is there a motion to pass that resolution?
And here's Karen Melander Magoon. She's gonna
Yes, thanks, Liz.
give her own words.
You were incredible. Thank you so much for identifying many of the problems that we face today, as well as the history. And thank all of you for, thank all of you for coming. And I want to thank Dolores and Art, you out there. There are people that have kept this movement going, and also Father Vitali, who we memorialized on Friday, and miss him so much. Because those are the kind of people we need to keep. You talk about a movement has to do with individuals too. And I remember what inspired this Occupy rap that I'm going to read to you here is actually coming home from I was coming from Book Passage where Czesław Miłosz was being, he was a Nobel Prize winner, Polish writer, and it was just fantastic. And I come and I wanted to walk by the Occupy area across from the ferry building where they had just raised all of the tents and let the people go. And then there was someone having seizures in the middle of a circle there, and there were 150 policemen in full gear. And I walked in, I walked in front of each of them and said, you can make a choice. You're probably young. I don't know. I can't see how old you are, the way you are all decked out. But we have someone having a seizure here. Is there an ambulance coming? Nothing. I call 911. They say, oh, no problem. The police are handling it. I said, the police aren't handling it. We need an ambulance now. An ambulance came. And I was just, yes, there is repression. Yes, Occupy represented an opposition force that did not want it to happen. So anyway, here's my Occupy rap. Occupy rap. Occupy, occupy, ask communities to sanctify, verify, not vilify, love of freedom, love of hope, love of all, shut no one out. Share your breakfast, share your thoughts, share the earth just as you ought. Keep your carbon footprint clean. Occupy, but don't be mean. Spend your time, share a dime. Occupy, but share your space. Give a hand, it's not a race. Occupy, occupy. Time for us to sanctify. Brothers, sisters, we are one. Occupy one space, one sun can warm us all. It must be done in incremental moments. We can find our path and share the key to occupy a world of caring. Occupy a world of sharing. Animals and birds and plants and fish and leopards, bugs and ants who build their castles underground, where rabbits live and moles have found their little burrows, little homes where each can be themselves and rest. So people too, each need their nest. Occupy, occupy, ask communities to sanctify, verify, not vilify, love of freedom, love of hope, love of all, shut no one out. Love of all, shut no one out. Love of all. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was amazing, thank you. And we do have to wrap up now, so thank you all so much for coming today. Some of us are going to be down at Montgomery and Sacramento Street at 4 p.m. There's going to be a rally outside the Israeli consulate talking about our feelings about what's happening over there right now. Maybe you'd like to join us. If not, we'll see you for Forum in 2 weeks, I think it is, on the last Sunday of October. And have a great day, everyone.